I left a cluttered apartment in the city, left behind a desk job that had me staring at spreadsheets and blinking cursors week after week. You lose yourself in that kind of work. Or maybe you lose touch with yourself. Either way, I knew I needed space. Room to breathe. Room to feel small again. The kind of small that only the wild can give you. When the Forest Service accepted my application, I was relieved more than excited. I thought I was stepping into something honest, simpler, in its own way. Just me, the land, and a list of routes to check. They gave me a beat that stretched across thousands of acres, overlapping the edge of protected territory and bordering a section no one seemed to want. The ranger before me transferred out early. No official reason given. It wasn't uncommon. Locals I spoke to mentioned that side of the woods in a careful sort of way. Not fearful, exactly. Just measured. A kind of caution I didn't understand at first. They'd say things like, "Watch the trees after dark." They lean funny out that way. Or, "If you hear someone calling your name from the brush, don't answer." Then they'd smile like it was just a joke. But their eyes would stay fixed and serious. I logged those moments. Mentally, at first. Later, in writing. The first few weeks on patrol were uneventful. Just the kind of routine I had been hoping for. The morning mist across the ridgelines, the earthy hush of moss underfoot. I'd track elk from a distance, listen to the woodpeckers knock rhythm into silence. You start to understand how alive a place like this is once you stop talking over it. But something began to change. Something subtle. The animals behaved differently in certain sectors. Whole stretches of trail where no birds sang, no squirrels darted, just a thick, hanging stillness. I told myself it was wind patterns, elevation shifts, maybe even nearby logging activity. Something with a name. Something you could measure. Then I found the first marker. It was a totem, not tribal, not something from the park's education center either. It was handmade. Rough twine, bones, small, delicate, and pieces of what looked like deer hide wrapped into a shape I couldn't make sense of. Hung high in the trees, too high for a person to have placed it without climbing gear. There were no signs of footprints beneath it. No disturbances in the underbrush. It just appeared. I took it down, bagged it, logged it. 2 days later, a second one appeared. This one closer to my cabin. Same materials, same construction, same eerie silence in the air around it. I stopped sleeping soundly after that. My radio, which had worked perfectly before, began picking up faint transmissions at night. Not words, just the sound of breathing. Long, steady, intentional. As if someone was standing right on the other end of the signal, waiting. I checked with dispatch. They logged no communication during those hours. No one else was out there. I began waking to strange arrangements around my cabin. Rocks stacked in impossible shapes. Pine cones laid in concentric circles. Sometimes I'd find small animal bones cleaned white and left on my windowsill, placed as though part of a display. No signs of scavengers. No blood. On one occasion, I found my trail camera torn clean off the tree. Not clawed, not knocked loose. Ripped. The nylon strap that held it was shredded like paper. When I retrieved the footage from its final hours, the video was corrupted. Just white noise and flickering. Except for the final frame. One image. A silhouette in the distance. Too large for a person. Upright, but wrong. Just standing at the edge of the clearing where the trees begin. I didn't show it to anyone. I wasn't ready to explain something I couldn't understand. But I kept recording. I wrote everything down. I took photos. I marked locations. And through it all, I kept working. Day after day, hike after hike, pretending the forest wasn't shifting around me. I kept hoping it was stress, isolation, maybe the remnants of an overactive mind that hadn't quite adjusted to the silence. But the forest, it had other plans. This isn't just a story about strange shapes in the dark. It's not about fear either. It's about change. About the kind of change that settles in quietly and stays. The kind you don't recognize until everything familiar starts to feel just a little bit off, until you realize the ground beneath you isn't as solid as it used to be. I kept this to myself for too long. Now, I'm laying it all out. What I saw, what I heard, what I tried to bury, because I'm not sure how long it will let me keep talking. They told me my assignment would be temporary, just a few months to cover for a veteran ranger who had taken indefinite leave. No explanation given. Not unusual. Burnout happens. People underestimate what the quiet can do to a person after a few years. I didn't ask questions. I was eager. I packed what I needed and made the 7-hour drive into a part of the country I had never seen. The roads narrowed with each hour. Cell reception disappeared entirely after mile marker 212. Eventually, the pavement gave way to dirt, and I drove the last stretch with nothing but forest on either side. No signs, no traffic, just endless green and the groan of gravel under my tires. My new post was tucked into a basin between two ranges, land untouched by tourists and largely unvisited by hikers. A cabin stood there, nestled in a clearing, weathered but standing strong. Solar panels, a backup generator, two-way radio, and a single-lane access road that could vanish under snow come November. It was isolated in every sense of the word. I settled in, stocked the shelves, walked the perimeter. The landscape was breathtaking, towering Douglas firs, canyons woven with streams, distant peaks always peeking through the tree line like watching eyes. For the first time in years, I felt still. I felt grounded. And then I met the locals. There were only a few, families that had lived near the forest edge for generations. Farmers, trappers, seasonal loggers. They were friendly, but cautious. Their words had weight. Conversations had a rhythm you didn't interrupt. They asked where I was posted. When I told them, Sector 12B, past Gallows Hollow, they went quiet. One of them, an older man named Eli, leaned in and said, "You keep to the marked trails. You see something that doesn't make sense, you let it be. You hear something calling, you don't answer." Then he nodded, like that was enough explanation. I laughed politely. Thought it was just backwoods folklore, passed down like ghost stories to scare off outsiders. But then I noticed something strange. A week into my patrols, I began seeing carvings in the trees, deep, deliberate markings. Not initials, not wildlife damage. These were symbols. Some resembled runes, others looked like crude human figures with elongated arms or eyes etched too wide. They were old, weathered, and always carved facing east. I started photographing them, logged GPS coordinates, noted the diameter of the trees, the depth of the cuts. But no pattern emerged, just scattered warnings in a language no one had bothered to translate. That same week, I came across my first abandoned campsite. It wasn't registered, no entry in the trail log, no backcountry permit filed, just a collapsed tent, a rusted-out thermos, and a pair of boots half buried in dirt. The fire pit was cold, but not ancient. Maybe 2 weeks old. I found no trash, no food wrappers, just absence. The oddest thing was how clean it was, as if whoever had stayed there packed up in a rush, but then never left. I reported it. Dispatch acknowledged the note, said they'd add it to the next survey. Nothing urgent. Over the next few weeks, I found 3 more sites like that. Each one deeper in the woods than the last. Each one with the same eerie signs. Gear left behind, but no sign of people. no sign of struggle, no clear tracks, and the carvings grew more frequent the deeper I went. At one point, I found a sapling completely encircled by them. Dozens of symbols carved in precise rings from base to tip, as though someone or something had spent hours marking it, ritualistically, carefully. The cuts were fresh. I touched one of them, just lightly. And I swear, I don't care how this sounds, the bark was warm, like it had a pulse, like something had just been there. I pulled my hand away and didn't go back to that grove for a long time. That night, I dreamt of whispering, not words, just breathe, hundreds of voices exhaling at once. I woke up gasping, heart racing. The windows were fogged from the inside. The cabin was cold. The next morning, I found fresh prints outside, human-shaped, barefoot, leading in wide circles around the perimeter. I started locking the cabin after that, even in daylight. I kept telling myself there had to be explanations, local pranksters, unmarked hiker camps, natural decay. But the explanations always felt like they were arriving late, always just a step behind whatever was happening out here. Then, during a routine sweep of Trail 6A, I found something I still can't talk about without losing my breath. It was another abandoned site, but this one had something new. Hanging from a branch above the cold fire pit was a bundle, twine-wrapped, about the size of a small melon. I climbed up and cut it down. Inside was a mess of items, tufts of hair, bits of fur, broken mirror shards, a scrap of notebook paper with smeared ink that read, "We thought it would leave us alone if we gave it something." That was the first time I wrote the word offering in my log. I didn't sleep at the cabin that night. I stayed in my truck, engine running, spotlight pointed at the tree line. Nothing approached. But nothing left either. I could feel it, the weight of something just past the edge of visibility. Watching. I'd been in the woods long enough to know when something is wrong, but I hadn't yet admitted it aloud. That part came later. Still, something had shifted. The job wasn't what I thought it would be. And the forest wasn't just trees and trails. It was listening. It was late October when I saw the first one. The weather had started to turn by then. The air carried that early frost smell, that brittle silence you only hear right before snow finds the ground. I was deep into Trail 7C, a part of the forest that barely got patrols anymore, mostly because the map still showed it as inaccessible. But there'd been a recent landslide to the north that opened up a few overgrown switchbacks, and I figured I'd log them for the trail maintenance team. I remember the exact moment I saw it. I was bushwhacking along a dry creek bed, maybe a mile off the marked path, when I stepped into a hollow that the GPS didn't show. It wasn't dramatic, just a shallow dip in the terrain. But it was quiet. Too quiet. Even the usual underbrush noise was gone. No insects, no rustle. Just a kind of blankness in the air. And then I saw it. A staircase, standing alone in the middle of the forest. No structure, no ruins, no path leading to or away from it. Just there. It looked like it had been pulled straight out of a house. Beige carpeting stained at the edges. Wooden handrail worn smooth. 13 steps, leading straight up, and then ending. Nothing above it. Just sky. I stopped walking. Not because I was afraid, but because the logic of it short-circuited something in my head. It didn't belong. Not just to the forest, but to the world as I knew it. It felt like seeing a fish swimming in the air. A contradiction so complete that your brain stalls trying to process it. I approached slowly. There were no footprints, no indentations in the dirt around the base. It wasn't anchored into the ground. It stood upright, perfectly still. No supports, just vertical, impossibly balanced on soft soil. I circled it, touched the banister. It was warm, warmer than the surrounding air. I didn't climb it, not that day. I marked the coordinates and backed away, hiked straight out, didn't look back until I was on the main trail again. When I returned to the station, I brought it up on the evening radio call, just mentioned it in passing, like it was a maintenance issue. Came across a staircase out near 7C. Looks like debris from an old homestead, maybe. Logging artifact? Silence. Then dispatch answered, "Copy that. No further action needed." Not a question, a dismissal. I followed up with an email, attached a photo. No reply. A week later, the same dispatcher forwarded me a general trail report. No mention of the staircase. When I asked about it directly on the next call, her tone changed. Tighter. More formal. Some structures are considered legacy anomalies. Standard policy is non-interference. Legacy anomalies. That was the phrase that stuck with me. I didn't like the sound of it. It had the ring of something old. Old enough that people had stopped bothering to understand it. So I started digging. I went through our archives. Digital, then paper. Buried in a 2008 incident log, I found a mention of unattached stair architecture, reported by another ranger in a different sector. No photo, just a line. Removed without incident. But when I called the ranger listed in the report, the number was disconnected. When I asked colleagues if they'd ever seen anything similar, the answers came in low, uneasy tones. Yeah, you'll find weird stuff out there. Don't touch it. Just mark it and move on. One ranger, an old guy who'd been around longer than anyone else, leaned over during lunch and said some things get built in places they shouldn't, and if you see more than one, it means it's moving. Moving. That word made my stomach drop, because a few days after the first sighting, I found another one. This one was different. Metal. Spiral. Rusted through in places. It was pressed right into the bank of a ravine, coiled like a snake, leading up into the canopy and then stopping midair, 10 feet shy of any branch. Like it had once led somewhere, but that place had been erased. Again, no prints, no path to it. Just the staircase, waiting. That's when the dreams began. In them, I'm always standing at the base of a staircase, but the sky above it is wrong. Not dark, just blank, flat, as if the stars have been scraped off. I hear something at the top, breathing or moving, but never coming down, just pacing, waiting for me to climb. I wake up before I take the first step, but the urge is there. Every time I dream it, I get closer to stepping onto that bottom stair, closer to finding out what's up there. A part of me is terrified of that, but another part, the part I've spent a lifetime trying to keep quiet, wants to know, wants to see. I started returning to the first staircase, taking measurements, checking the ground. I noticed something odd. Moss wouldn't grow within a certain radius. The birds wouldn't perch on the trees nearest it. The sounds of the forest faded as I got close, like the land itself was holding its breath. One day, I found a dead fox lying at the base. No wounds, no blood, just lifeless, like it had dropped mid-stride. I left it there, came back the next day, and it was gone. No scavenger marks, no drag lines, just vanished. I began to suspect I wasn't alone on those visits. I'd hear twigs breaking behind me, even when I stood still. Shadows where there should have been light. The sense that I was being observed, but never directly. Like something just outside the veil of perception was watching. But I kept returning. And eventually, I climbed. Just one step, then another. I stood halfway up, heart racing, ears ringing. The forest looked different from that height. not just in shape but in texture. The colors were too sharp. The trees seemed thinner, like silhouettes made of paper, bending in a wind I couldn't feel. I stayed there for nearly 10 minutes. Then I came back down. But that night, something changed. I woke to the sound of footsteps on my cabin roof. Measured, heavy, walking in slow, deliberate circles. I didn't move, I didn't breathe, just listened, eyes wide open in the dark. And I realized something. It wasn't pacing. It was mimicking. Mimicking the way I had circled the staircases, the exact rhythm, the same pause at the corner, the same final step. It was studying me. And suddenly, I wasn't sure I'd ever been the one investigating it. The first report came in mid-November. A father and his teenage daughter, hikers from out of state, never checked out of their trailhead parking permit. Their car was found locked, parked neatly at the visitor center. Inside were a few fast food wrappers, a map with several trails highlighted, and a cooler still full of unopened water bottles. Nothing out of place. Except they were gone. No cell phone pings, no credit card activity, no campsite registered. Search and rescue ran a standard grid, but I knew where they should have started. Trail 7C. That was where I found the first trace. A child's backpack. Purple. Tinkerbell keychain. Hanging from a branch like someone had placed it there on purpose. There was no dirt on it. No scuffing. The stitching wasn't even wet, despite the rain the night before. I called it in, logged the coordinates, took photos. But something about the whole scene felt wrong. The bag wasn't lost. It had been positioned. Over the next 3 weeks, it kept happening. A scarf, a hiking boot, size 11, men's, clean laces, upright, placed squarely in the center of a dry patch of moss. A digital camera, powered off, no damage. Photos intact. The last image was a shaky blur taken in failing light. But behind the blur was a structure, a staircase. I compared it to mine. Different building. This one had bricks and what looked like vines growing across it. Meaning it wasn't the same one. There were more. I started marking them on a separate map, one I didn't keep at the ranger station. There were 5 separate reports of missing persons filed between November and early January. 3 were solo hikers. 1 was a group of friends. The father and daughter made 5. All vanished within a 2-mile radius of where I first found the staircase. I stopped reporting my findings because it had become clear to me they knew. Someone in the department or above it knew about these things. And the silence, the erasures, the vague responses, they weren't born of ignorance. They were policy. The stairs were a boundary, a gate. And once you knew where they were, you were on the wrong side of something. The forest began to change. Not visibly, not at first, but perceptibly, audibly. The silence that had once felt peaceful now pressed on my eardrums like water at the bottom of a pool. Shadows moved when they shouldn't. One morning, I saw my own shadow fall the wrong direction. The sun was at my back. I could feel its heat, but the shadow stretched toward me, not behind. I checked my compass. It spun. My trail cam footage from the sites began glitching. Missing time. Static flashes. But worse were the frames that weren't blank. Images of nothing but trees and mist. But when slowed down, 1 frame at a time, you could sometimes catch a figure, standing still. No face, no movement, just watching. I reviewed 1 clip late one night in the cabin. I watched the frames over and over, trying to convince myself it was a trick of the light, a tree, a trick of pixel compression, until I realized. The figure was standing in the same place in every frame, and that same spot was less than 50 yards from the cabin. I stepped outside with my flashlight. The light flickered once, then again, then the batteries went dead. I stood there in total silence, No wind, no insects, no night birds. The forest felt like a photograph, still, cold, unmoving. But I wasn't alone. I didn't hear it. I felt it. A shift in pressure, like someone had opened a door behind me that let in a colder world. I turned slowly and saw nothing. But I didn't sleep that night. The next day, I tried calling out sick. No signal. I checked the radio. Static. I drove to the station. The digital lock on the door didn't respond to my keycard. It was like I had been locked out of the world. Time itself began to slip. I'd head out for what felt like 30 minutes and return to find the sun setting. I'd wake up in darkness even though the clock read 8 a.m. My watch stopped working entirely. The analog needle on the barometer spun in slow, lazy circles. And every day, more belongings appeared, laid out like offerings, shoes arranged in pairs, phones powered down and placed carefully atop dry logs. A necklace looped around the branch of a tree I knew had no low-hanging limbs the day before. All of it near the staircases. And each time I approached, the feeling of being observed intensified. Not with curiosity, with expectation. I was being drawn in, not by force, but by familiarity. The same way a flame draws a moth that doesn't understand why it moves closer. And eventually, I came to a realization I still struggle to accept. These stares aren't random. They appear because someone is meant to find them. And now, I was among the chosen. The name came to me by accident. It was scribbled in the margins of an old incident report I wasn't supposed to find. I had returned to the station one night after hiking the ridge above Sector D. A storm was moving in fast, and I needed to confirm a closed trail log. Power was out. Backup generator running low. I lit a kerosene lamp and rummaged through the old cabinets beneath the central desk, a place long neglected, filled with outdated maps and crumbling training manuals. That's where I found it. A yellowed manila folder with no official markings. Inside, 7 pages stapled loosely together. No dates, no headers, just crude documentation, journal style, describing a group that once inhabited the farthest durest of the forest, past the ravines beyond the known trails. They called themselves the Anima Mundi Collective. I had never heard the term before, but the way it was described, it didn't sound like hikers, or researchers, or a religious group. It read like a warning. The pages spoke of integration with the unseen, of awakening what does not use language, of rituals meant to loosen the self and let something older in. The final page was nearly illegible, water-damaged, smeared, but I could still make out one sentence at the bottom. The stairs are the beginning, but never look behind you on the 5th step. I stared at that line until the lamp began to dim. From that moment, the name Anima Mundi threaded itself into everything. I began dreaming. Not the kind you forget when you wake. These dreams were architectural, ancient. A staircase that curled upward into skyless black. Columns carved with symbols that breathed. They moved when I tried to focus on them. And voices layered like sediment. None I could understand, but all of them knew me. On waking, I'd find small things out of place. The compass needle fixed due north, pine needles scattered across my floor in perfect circles. My cabin mirror fogged from the inside. I returned to the report, traced the coordinates mentioned, unlisted, miles from any sanctioned route. It took me 4 hours on foot, cutting through brush and terrain unmarked by any trail map. But I found it. An overgrown clearing in a basin of rock, and at its center the remains of a camp. Not tents, not lean-tos. Structures, wood, and canvas, partially collapsed. A central fire pit, ringed with animal bones and something that looked like melted wax. I moved carefully. Inside what may have once been the communal building, I found a circle of symbols burned into the floor. Shapes I recognized from my dreams. Beside them, a notebook, leather-bound, molded but intact. I opened it. The first page was dated 1972. The name at the bottom was Elsa R. Merton, Archivist of Inner Tracings. Page after page detailed the group's practices: fasting, chanting, blindfolded walks through the woods for decomposition of self. But then, something changed. The language turned desperate. We should never have opened the fourth gate. It watches through the bark. Some of us are no longer who we were. The last entry: if I disappear, it is because I followed the hum. And I deserve what comes. I read that final line by the light of my headlamp, and I realized I could hear it too. A low hum. Just outside. Constant. Directionless. I stepped outside the structure. The air felt wrong. Not cold. Not still. But too perfect. Like someone had hit pause on the weather. I packed up everything. The journal, 2 artifacts I could safely carry, a ceramic mask and a brass compass that pointed east no matter how I turned it. On my way out, I felt eyes. Not human, not animal. I didn't see them. But the weight of their gaze pressed on my spine with every step I took back toward the ridge. That night I dreamt again. I was inside a staircase, not climbing it, becoming it. Each step was a memory being removed, one by one. I was forgetting my name, my role, why I was even walking, and behind me, just at the edge of hearing, something kept pace. I didn't look back. The morning after, I tried to report the findings. But my messages were blocked. Files corrupted. Even printouts came out blank, ink drained as if memory itself had been siphoned away. I went to the central office, showed the journal. My superior stared at me with a tired smile and said, "You've been working too many shifts alone." He handed me a mental health pamphlet. That's when I knew. Whatever the Anima Mundi collective had uncovered, whatever they became, it hadn't been erased. It had been contained. And now, I was on the wrong side of that containment. It started with the sound. 3 nights after returning from the site of the Anima Mundi collective, I was woken just before 3 a.m. At first, I thought it was the wind. But wind doesn't say your name. Not in your mother's voice. Not from the tree line. I sat up in bed, heart thudding, hard enough I could feel it in my neck. My cabin was dark. I hadn't left any lights on. But my lantern, it was lit. Faintly. Flickering. I didn't remember lighting it. Then the knock came. 4 slow raps on the cabin door. I reached for my service weapon only to find the holster empty. The knocks came again. This time, softer, like they weren't made with knuckles. I stood up, body tight with adrenaline. My radio crackled, came to life without warning. Please open. It's so cold. I'm lost. The voice belonged to my sister. She died 4 years ago. I opened the cabin door. The forest stood still, silent. A fog had rolled in so thick I couldn't see past the first row of trees. But there was something at the edge, a shape, roughly human, slender, standing at least 7 feet tall, limbs too long. The arms hung past the knees, no clothes, no features I could recognize. Just movement. The surface of its body shimmered like water under skin. And then it spoke again. "I'm here now. You don't have to be alone." It wasn't my sister's voice anymore. It was mine. Exactly mine. The pitch, the pauses, the way I clipped my R's when tired. It used my voice with the same broken edge I had when I was 14 and had to bury our dog alone. I shut the door, locked it, backed away, heart pounding. The knock came again, but this time, from the back wall of the cabin. I didn't sleep that night, and I didn't speak of it the next morning. But the visits continued. Sometimes it was a laugh I hadn't heard in years. My father's. He died in a fire. Other times it was the voice of my ex-girlfriend, whispering something we'd said to each other once in the dark. We'll grow old in the quiet, together. The entity wasn't attacking. It was intruding, inserting itself into my memory. I tried to record it. I mounted a trail cam facing the clearing behind my cabin. I set up a second voice recorder on the interior windowsill. When I played back the tapes, all I got was static. Every time I rewound it, the same thing happened. 32 seconds of static. Then silence. Then me, saying things I'd never said. You're looking in the wrong direction. It's already inside. You should have stayed asleep. I checked the timestamps. They were correct. But the footage? Gone. Each time, the final frame showed my cabin, frozen in a single moment, always with one additional shadow just outside the doorframe. It got worse. I began to feel altered, nosebleeds. At first, minor, then daily. I'd blink and find my hands trembling, fingernails dirty with black soil I hadn't touched. I'd wake up fully dressed in places I didn't remember going. One morning, I found myself 20 yards from my cabin, standing barefoot in a perfectly circular patch of dead leaves. In the center, something had been carved, not by tools, by pressure. I don't know what it meant, but the next night, I didn't sleep at all. I heard it again, walking the perimeter. A slow, rhythmic pace. It circled the cabin 5 times. On the 6th, it stopped. I gripped my flashlight, stood by the window, waited. That's when I saw it. It wasn't outside anymore. It was inside, in the reflection, standing just behind me. I turned, swung the flashlight wildly. Nothing. But I'd seen its eyes. Or rather, I hadn't. There were no eyes. Just a smooth, reflective surface where a face should have been And in that surface, I saw myself. Except, I was smiling. I wasn't smiling in real life. I ran, into the woods. No flashlight, no gear, just instinct and terror. It followed. I could hear it shifting behind me. The ground didn't crack beneath its weight. It bent. The trees leaned. The wind stopped. I tripped, slammed into the roots of a half-dead pine, and rolled down into a gully. My vision blurred, breathing ragged. Something cracked in my ribs. And that's when it stood above me, the entity, still in that flickering, unfinished human shape. But now its voice wasn't mimicking. It was asking. You brought the journal. I couldn't answer. Then I heard my voice again, clearer this time. Let go. Let us in. You'll understand when the body stops lying. I blacked out. When I came to, it was morning. I was alone. No sign of a struggle, no wounds, save the bleeding from my nose and a deep bruise down my right side, but something was different. My journal was gone, and in my shirt pocket, a single black feather, smooth, warm to the touch, and humming, just slightly, the hum from my dreams. I told myself I wouldn't return. I told myself I wouldn't even look in its direction again. But that's not how it works. When something finds you in the dark, it doesn't let go. It waits. The staircase was waiting. The reports of the missing had slowed publicly. But internally, within our small ranger circle, the numbers were still rising. Discreetly, no headlines, just names whispered through static-filled radios and filed in reports that always seemed to get lost in transport. On my final patrol, I found myself back at the clearing. No trail led to it. No GPS marked its location. But there it was, as if it had always been there, as if I'd been built around it. A staircase, concrete, floating, untouched by moss or mold, suspended in the forest like it had been carved from the void. My boots didn't make a sound when they touched the first step. That was the first clue. No feedback, no crunch of dirt, no resistance, just weightless momentum. I ascended. 10 steps, 20. I should have reached the top, but instead the trees around me bent, not physically, perceptually, as if the world shifted around the staircase, bending space to accommodate something older. I stopped, looked down. I should have seen the forest floor, but I didn't. There was only fog, a soft, slow swirl like breath from a mouth that didn't exist. And then I slipped. Fell, not downward, inward. The staircase disappeared, and I was falling into a space that had no top, no bottom, no direction at all. My limbs felt weightless, but I was moving fast, faster than I could understand. Through something. Memories rushed past me, but not mine. I saw a child with a lantern walking alone through snow. I saw a soldier crying in a field of ash, holding a necklace and mumbling words in a language I didn't know. I saw a man hang himself in a tree that grew sideways. I saw myself, asleep at my ranger station. But something stood over me, watching, not harming, just studying. Then, just as suddenly, I landed. But I didn't hit ground. I arrived. The place was still. Not silent, still. A realm that wasn't forest, but wore the memory of one. Trees stood, but they didn't move. Leaves shimmered like glass. I walked, slowly. Every step felt like I was walking through molasses and static. Shadows flitted across the horizon. Not people, echoes. I passed a man speaking to a woman in a dress soaked in blood. Neither acknowledged me. He wept. She smiled. I passed a tent, old military style, where a man in ranger gear paced violently, muttering numbers. Then he stopped, looked up, and spoke directly to me. "You're carrying it. You're the key. We buried it too shallow." I blinked. He vanished. Further ahead, I saw something half buried in the soil that wasn't quite soil. It shimmered, called to me. A small totem, carved from black wood, adorned with feathers and bone fragments. It pulsed with a heartbeat I could feel in my palm. The moment I touched it, the air around me changed. Pressure, time, reversed, or maybe snapped. The trees began to bleed. Thick sap oozed upward instead of down. Voices came all at once. "You saw too much. You were warned." The collective lives through observation. The totem burned in my hand. I couldn't drop it. My feet locked in place, and the sky shattered. Not figuratively, literally. Cracks spider-webbed above me. Behind those cracks, eyes that had no owner. A scream rang out. But it wasn't mine, it was the place itself. The realm collapsed. I was falling again. Through layers of moments. I saw the staircase again. Then I was below it. Then above it. Then I was the staircase. A passage. A memory. A trap. I landed back in the clearing. Daylight. My boots scuffed the earth. There was no staircase behind me, but in my hand, the totem remained. Warm, beating, watching. And the forest had changed. Birds chirped with no rhythm. Trees leaned toward me. And in the distance, faint but clear, a voice that was mine, whispering, "You brought it back." I came to with dirt in my mouth and the sound of wind I couldn't feel. My radio was dead. My watch blinked the wrong year. 3 days had passed. No food, no water, and somehow not a scratch on my body. Not the kind you can see. But there was a humming in my ears, like distant machinery, like an engine buried deep in the earth, turning slow, turning ancient. My legs worked. Eventually. I made my way to the ranger station, stumbling like a drunk, my mind flickering through frames I couldn't hold on to. And when I got there, it was like they'd been waiting. Not worried, not searching, just waiting. "You've been gone a while," one of them said. "You all right?" I tried to speak. The words came out slow. My voice was hoarse. I asked if they'd been looking for me. They shrugged. We filed a report, but got told to hold off. Said you were probably off-grid doing a solo recon. Higher-ups didn't seem concerned. I told them what I saw. The staircase, the realm, the totem. Their faces stayed flat. One of them even laughed. "Man, you sure you didn't take a spill and knock your head?" I insisted. I begged them to look at my notes, my maps. But when I opened my journal, the pages were blank. My phone wiped. My trail cam melted. Literally. The plastic casing deformed like it had been left inside a furnace. "You might want to see someone," they said. And I did. The station sent me to a federal psych evaluator in another district. Clean bill of health. But the man held my gaze a little too long when he signed the release. He said only this: "Some stories don't get written down. You were lucky." A week later, I was reassigned. Different forest, lower elevation, closer to a town, less isolation. They called it a reset. I called it a containment. But nothing reset. The dreams started immediately. A humming staircase, eyes behind walls, my own voice reciting coordinates I don't remember learning. And the totem? It wasn't in my bag when I left, but I still feel it. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I feel it pulsing beneath my skin. Like something was left open, like something followed me back. My new station doesn't have a clearing like the old one, but it has shadows that stay too long. Radios still click at 3:03 a.m. And the trees? They lean in, just slightly, as if listening. I filed one more report, this time with exact GPS coordinates. I included a warning. I marked the location in bold, "Do not enter." 3 days later, I was informed the file had been misplaced. Technical error, they said. But that wasn't true. I know because the next morning, the envelope I'd sealed the report in was sitting on my bunk, unopened, and written on the back, in handwriting that wasn't mine, just 4 words: "It's always listening back." So now I document this way, quietly, carefully, hoping that if anyone hears this, you'll remember one thing: not everything in the forest wants to be found, but once you do, it finds you back. It had been almost 7 years. I'd built a new life, different region, different title. I rarely wore the uniform anymore. People knew me as the quiet one, the ranger who didn't talk much, didn't socialize, kept his eyes low when passing the tree line. And truthfully, I thought I'd left it all behind. The sounds, the visions, the growing weight behind my ribs. But when I opened the door that morning, early spring, first rain, still drying on the stoop, I saw it. A box. No address, no postage. Just placed there. I brought it inside with the carefulness I'd reserved only for evidence, or something that could explode. Inside was a single item, a VHS tape. No label, just a faint red smear across the edge. I didn't have a VCR anymore. Who did? I had to call an old friend, a former investigator who owed me a favor. He came over the next evening lugging an ancient player with cracked knobs and cigarette burns along the side. We connected it to the TV, pressed play, and the screen lit up with snow, then a timestamp. 050423, 140306. I blinked. That was the day I vanished. The day I returned. The footage was grainy, as if filmed from a body cam, but it wasn't mine. The angle was wrong, the movement too smooth. And then I saw myself. I was walking, aimless, my gait off, my hands outstretched, fingertips grazing bark. I looked up and spoke something, but there was no audio, just static hiss. The camera zoomed in. My eyes. They weren't mine. I mean, they were physically mine, but the look behind them, it was hollow, like I wasn't there, just the shell. Then the tape glitched. Flashed frames, symbols, faces, warped, elongated, some of them flickering into that same humanoid mimic I'd encountered years ago. The audio kicked in for a second. Not mine, not the entity's. A third voice. Calm, unfeeling. It said, "You carried it beyond the boundary. You brought it through." My friend paused the tape, looked at me. "What is this, man? Who filmed this?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because suddenly, I remembered something. A fragment. A sensation I hadn't let myself revisit. When I'd collapsed near the forest's edge back then, I hadn't just woken up. I'd been placed, laid out, gently, as if returned, and the trees around me had formed a perfect circle, dead leaves arranged in seals. We pressed play again. The footage had changed. It wasn't the forest anymore. It was my house. The timestamp read 050423, 040212. That was yesterday. On screen, I was asleep. The angle was from inside the room. Something moved near the dresser, a distortion, a shimmer, like heat rising off asphalt. The image began to degrade, audio clicking and garbled, but still underneath the hiss, I heard it again. The third voice. We don't stay in one place. We grow in the memory. We're no longer rooted to the soil. The screen went black, and a final message faded in, line by line. The forest is not a place. It is a threshold, and once crossed, it crosses you. I turned off the TV. My friend was pale, motionless. "You ever talk to anyone about this?" he asked. I shook my head. He nodded, slowly. Then he said, "You shouldn't have watched it. Some doors don't close once you've seen through them." That night, I didn't sleep. Not because of fear, but because every time I shut my eyes, I felt watched from the inside. My dreams didn't belong to me anymore. The forest, it seems, never ends. Not in space, not in time, and certainly not in memory. It began with a sound I hadn't heard in years. Not in this world, anyway. A low hum, just beneath the threshold of hearing, like air pressing against itself. I woke to it, just before dawn, sweat pooling at my collarbone. No storm, no wind, just the sound. A summons. And I knew somehow it was time. I packed what I thought I'd need. Compass, journal, flare, audio recorder. None of it mattered. Not really. But it made the decision feel more human, more deliberate. I left a note. Not a goodbye, just a direction, a name. Someone had to know where I'd gone. Then I drove. Hours passed. Roads gave way to dirt and dirt to gravel, and then gravel to nothing but ruts buried under roots. I parked a mile from the old boundary where the trees grew close together and even birds wouldn't sing. I stepped into the forest, and I swear the air shifted. It took me the better part of the day to reach the place. But when I arrived, the staircase was gone. No clearing, no steps. Just the slight impression in the ground where something heavy once stood. But the marks were still there. The trees bore fresh carvings, not symbols now, but shapes, eyes, not human, not animal. Something older, watching, always watching. I stood there for a long time, waiting. And that's when I heard it, the voice. Not spoken aloud, not carried on wind. It was like a memory, being whispered back into place. It said, "You returned of your own will. That changes the nature of your path." I turned, and for the briefest second, I saw it. The entity, but different now. No longer a mimic, no longer attempting to wear my mother's voice or echo a childhood friend. It stood as itself. A silhouette stitched from motion and shadow, arms long, head low, features undefined. But the sense of it, the gravity, was undeniable. It didn't speak again. But I understood. The staircase, the hallucinations, the anomalies, None of it was random. The forest was aware, alive in a way that defied definition. It wasn't haunted. It wasn't cursed. It was conscious. And what I'd met, what I'd feared, was its voice. Not a monster, not a spirit, a translator, a guardian, or perhaps a test. I reached into my pack, pulled out the journal I'd been keeping since that first week on the job. Every symbol, every disappearance, every audio glitch and night terror, all of it cataloged. I laid it at the base of the old tree, the one marked with the deepest carvings. I said only one word: enough. The wind stopped. The air thickened. And in that stillness, the forest accepted. I don't know how long I stood there, but when I opened my eyes, the clearing was empty. The symbols had faded, and in their place was a path, a trail that hadn't been there before, one that seemed to bend light at the edges, as if space itself was being rewritten. I followed it, not out of curiosity, not out of fear, but with a kind of reverence. I knew now what the forest wanted. It didn't seek worship. It didn't demand sacrifice. It needed memory, someone to remember the truth, to carry it forward, to make sure the cycle didn't claim another soul unaware. I reached the ridge just as dusk fell. From that vantage point, I saw them, campers, miles off, new hikers, laughing, setting up tents, unaware of what watched them from the edge. I turned away, and I stayed. I became the one who walks the perimeter at night, the presence in the dark with a flashlight flickering through the trees. I don't intervene often, only when the forest calls for it, only when another soul inches too close to the forgotten threshold. My name has long since been erased from the roster, my face forgotten by most. But if you find yourself deep in the woods and you hear a voice, familiar but wrong, or if you see a staircase standing alone, leave it be, turn around, and go back the way you came. Because not every forest is meant to be explored. Some are meant to be guarded, and some truths are meant to be carried by those who've already crossed over. If you've listened this far, if you felt the unease settle in your chest like fog over cold water, then you already understand. The wilderness is not empty. It is listening. Every stone, every twisted root, every hollowed-out trunk, they carry echoes of things most never see. And, if you're lucky, you never will. But should you ever find yourself alone in the woods, and you stumble across something that feels wrong, not because it's loud or grotesque, but because it doesn't belong. A door without a house, a light with no source, a staircase that leads nowhere. Don't investigate. Don't call out. Don't step forward. Walk away. Mark your path, and never return. Because some trails aren't made for the living. Some forests keep count. And once you're seen, you're never truly unseen again. If you've ever witnessed something you couldn't explain, if the woods once whispered your name when no one else was around, we want to hear from you. Share your account. There are others listening, others who know. Subscribe, stay vigilant, and remember, the forest doesn't forget.